All right, my friends. So for this writing workshop, how about we take a look at the lyrics of All Too Well by Taylor Swift. So this is this week's pop cultural trend, I suppose, this along with the 10-minute video. So in terms of sequencing, this is what I'm going to do. For this writing workshop, we're only going to do a literary analysis of the lyrics of All Too Well. And then next week, I'll tackle the video. So we have two very high interest things. So I'm hoping, for the sake of my benefit, that I get two lesson plans out of this, craze that's going on with Taylor Swift. So for today, we'll take a look at how my templates of the declarative and inverted thesis, as well as the syllogistic method, can be used to construct a literary analysis. So for those that are familiar with my work, ostensibly what we're going to be doing is applying the poetry templates, or basically just the literary analysis templates, to these lyrics. So the question that immediately gets posed is, how do I write the introductory paragraph? And my answer is always tacit for that. You can declare or invert the thesis. So let's break that down. When we create a prompt, especially if we're looking to get literary analysis and not something that reads like a Cliff Note summation or a book report or something that's super plot summative, there's two implicit questions that are asked in every prompt. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? I've done a lot of presentations in the past, some webinars and other like little appearances online, where I've broken down the fact that if you take a look at College Board prompts, in particular, the FRQ1, FRQ2 for the literature exam, and then the rhetorical analysis for the Lang exam, these two questions are manifest in every prompt. So what is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? So for literary analysis, you're going to always invert the thesis. So we don't even need to worry about the declarative. That's what you typically use for rhetorical analysis. And then it's a 50-50 shot for synthesis, persuasion, and argument. Research as well can be thrown into that. So for literary analysis, you always invert, and here's how that works. Within my templates, an introductory paragraph, while the training wheels are on, while the students are using these guardrails, is going to be 4 sentences long, no more, no less. And we know that left to their own devices, students will often write like 11-sentence introductions that get super plot summative. They're already beginning to quote and offer textual support and analysis in the introduction. Or we get the 1-sentence introduction that is a literary terms dumping ground. So we see a wide variety of glitches and snafus in that introduction. So this just simply houses their thinking to ensure that they get the thesis point. So 4 sentences, no more, no less. And then it needs to address both questions. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? And I'll demonstrate that a few times. I also look for tier 2 level vocabulary, and by that I just simply mean your average run-of-the-mill SAT level words to establish a good academic cadence. Sentence constructs are important for voice, rhythm, and flow. So one of the things that I teach in my mastermind classes is this idea that there are 12 different sentence constructs. And we know that our struggling and emerging students, even some of our better writers, overuse the short, simple declarative sentence. So you get truncated sentence followed by truncated sentence followed by truncated sentence, and you get this rather droning rhythm in the sequence of sentences. So you'll see my students have pretty good flow, pretty good rhythm. And with the inverted thesis, you end with the thesis. When you declare the thesis, you begin with the thesis statement, and in the inverted model, you end with the thesis. So let's take a look at how this looks on paper. So one of the things that is becoming a prevalent conversation in the college board circle for lit and for the rhetorical analysis on Lang is, do you present or withhold the terms and devices in the introductory paragraph? I'll show you both ways. I have a preference, but the template can house either way you want to go. I know it's sort of a teacher preference, so I'll show you both ways. So we're going to begin by answering the question, what is the authorial intent? And end with, how does the author construct meaning? So the first three sentences are the context and background of the authorial intent. So you're going to get a heavy thematic focus. And then the last sentence is, how does the author construct meaning? So thematically, we're going to get right at it in the opening sentence. A broken heart can change everything in life. Do you see how you got to be declarative when you announce? So a broken heart can change everything in life. It can turn one's life upside down, leaving little more than the pain of an aching absence. No matter if a soulmate is the one doing the breaking up or a deep affection goes unreciprocated, a hurting heart can devastate someone at the core of their being. So now is the time to answer the question, how does the author do this? So in this last sentence, we'll see the terms and devices. Again, this is a preference thing, so some teachers want it, others do not like this. And I'll show you in a second how to avoid doing this if you're of the latter persuasion. So Taylor Swift arrives at these sentiments in her song All Too Well through the juxtaposition of past and present, as well as the soulful repetition of her refrain. So you can see that the terms and devices are stated there. Here's another one. It's going to follow the exact same template. First three sentences, what is the authorial intent? Last sentence, how does the author construct meaning? Once a heart is shattered by the loss of love, one often futilely tries to put the pieces back together in the early phases of the breakup. But the thing is, nothing is quite ever the same once that sense of profound loss is recognized. That person before the fall is irretrievable and simply gets lost to the pain of a gnawing absence. So you can see heavy thematic focus. Basically, what's the gist of Taylor Swift's song? Why did she write it? What's her purpose? Or another way of looking at it is, what is her thesis statement? This last sentence, yet again, how does she do this? How does she construct that meaning? So you're going to use the terms and devices. Taylor Swift reflects upon these feelings through a series of paradoxical emotions and juxtapositions between the past and present. So those are the driving terms and devices of the song. We can do it again. Same thing. What is the authorial intent? How does the author construct meaning? 3 sentences for the first question, 1 sentence for the last question. In the early phases of a breakup, one often does not recognize the blessing of having a broken heart. Through all of those cracks and jaded shards, the light ultimately comes to shine through the pain. But this process of healing takes time and typically is a slow and painful process. And here we go again with the terms and devices. In her song All Too Well, Swift gives voice to this journey through her ruminating refrain and contrasting symbols. So we're 3 for 3 on this. And one of the things that you're seeing is my students have really good manipulation of the sentence constructs. So there's good voice rhythm flow. Their vocab is up without sounding like goons or stuffed suit Princeton professors, with Sherlock Holmes pipes. Sometimes students sound really pretentious when they stretch too far out of the wheelhouse of their vocabulary. And these kids sound natural, but it's academic and it's elevated. So I get to this through my word study academies, which I talk about in my mastermind classes. And then we do nuance academies early in the year where we work on voice and flow and rhythm. And I teach the students how to manipulate those 12 sentence constructs. So here's one. that does not use the literary terms or devices in the end. It's still going to be 4 sentences, focus on the tier 2, focus on the sentence constructs, but you're just going to get 4 sentences of ultimately authorial intent, and you do answer the question, how does the author construct the meaning of this, but you just leave the terms out. So here's an example. The really difficult thing about having a broken heart is that the world does not stop for one's grief. In effect, the cruel nature of life can be summarized by 3 words. It goes on. When a romantic relationship comes to an abrupt end, especially when the bonds of love are strong, a deep cut is formed and it takes time for it to heal. But in some cases, as Swift notes, some cuts leave deep scars. So that's perfect. Here is, how does she do it? But you're not putting the terms in. Or another way of looking at this is you're just focusing on authorial intent and you're keeping the construction of meaning until the body paragraphs. I have a preference for this because my template of the syllogistic method, which is used to construct the body paragraphs, immediately leads with the lit terms and devices. So I find it's redundant, at least for my templates, to front load with the terms and devices in the introductory paragraph. But I do have some struggling and emerging students that if they don't, then they do not meet the demands of the assignment and they get super plot summative. So just as a safety device, just as a scaffold, I have them put it in there. I think it's less artful than this method, but it works in the end. They get the thesis point. So here's another one following the exact same template that we just looked at. It's going to omit the terms and devices. So what is the authorial intent? When one is deeply in love, they often convince themselves that the relationship will withstand the test of time and be eternal. But as is known, these sentiments can often get reduced to wishful thinking. The pain that results from the abrupt termination of a relationship ultimately rests in the fact that time seems to stop. Even though one recovers and figures out a way to go on in life, those early phases of loss can shake the foundation of one's life and inner being. So either way, your preference. So with the terms and devices or without the terms and devices. So the next question students ask is this: how do I construct the body paragraphs? And I use something called the Syllogistic Method, which comes from the Aristotelian tradition. And my template can be used across the expository modes. So it can be used for literary analysis, rhetorical analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, and even research. So for the purposes of literary analysis, all you need to do is define what the first premise is, and I'll get to that in just a second. So let's just take a look at what a basic syllogism is and how it can be used to create and sustain a line of reasoning, because that's ultimately what we're going for. So in the Aristotelian tradition, a syllogism just proceeds from one premise to the next premise to a conclusion. And I could go on and do like a 5-hour video on just the syllogistic method, but for the sake of getting you guys to execute this with your students, I'll keep it brief. So in the first premise, let's say arsenic is deadly. Second premise, my dog ate arsenic. You're going to naturally conclude logically the following conclusion: my dog is going to die. So when students write, we want them to be as cogent and lockstep as this, and as possible. So ultimately, when students create a real tight line of reasoning, they're arguing syllogistically. So in terms of literary analysis, this is how you define the premises and the conclusion. So premise 1 is going to be an argument with a literary focus. So this is where the student is going to use their terms and devices. That's why I like to withhold them from the introductory paragraph. Again, but I keep emphasizing this, that's totally your preference. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Many ways to skin a fish. Premise 2 is going to be the textual support, and this is a teeter-totter balance between quoting and paraphrasing, and I'll get into how to embed quotes in just a second. And then the conclusion is textual analysis. So one of the things that students ask is this: all right, Mr. Kuhn, if the introductory paragraph is 4 sentences long, how many sentences is a syllogistic body paragraph? So mind you, premise 1, premise 2, and the conclusion comprises one body paragraph. So some teachers get confused and students get confused by when I say conclusion, they think I'm talking about the conclusion paragraph of the essay. Nope, it's the conclusion of the body paragraph, of the syllogistic body paragraph. So here's what I tell them. You're shooting for 10 sentences. You need a body paragraph with a certain degree of girth to it to have sufficient textual support and textual analysis. And those little itty-bitty 5-sentence body paragraphs that students often write just don't cut it. There's not enough there to fully sustain and hammer out an argument. So here's the deal. When you write syllogistically, the very first 3 sentences, so it's always going to take 3 sentences no matter the expository mode. The first 3 sentences lay down the argument. So as we know on the Lang exam for the synthesis paper, the College Board says 3 times, your argument must be central. The same goes for literary analysis in any expository mode, because all expository writing is an act of arguing. It's argument. So I always want the student's argument to be central. So therefore, I don't want them quoting. I don't want them paraphrasing. I don't want any of that stuff happening until the 4th sentence, so that it's perfectly clear to the reader that the student has a centralized argument. So what I do is this. I have students begin where the author begins. So right from the onset, where does Taylor Swift begin her song? And then we go hunting for the literary terms and devices. And we're going to place those into our argument. So again, this is one of the reasons why I don't include the literary terms in the introduction. So let's look at this. So you have the transition with her initial move. So therefore, we know logically that the student is going to go chronologically throughout their analysis. So with her initial move, Swift highlights the paradoxical nature of early love and the fact that most often the warning signs get overlooked. Partnerships are not without the occasional conflict, and with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, all that goes unseen to the early eye makes itself readily manifest in the end. But what really fuels the heartache is the colliding juxtaposition of the present awareness of loss and the close proximity of the love that just a short time ago seemed so near. So that took 3 sentences, and we know we're going to be looking at juxtaposition, paradox, and conflict. It's often a really good idea to get students to multitask that first premise. And what I mean is by that is this. So if they just have a body paragraph focusing on tone, then they go to diction, then they go to syntax, they're going to need like 9 body paragraphs to get at the totality of an analysis. And it's too clunky, it's too methodic. So they need to begin to see how the pieces interconnect with each other and how literary terms and devices talk to each other, how they hold hands with each other. So juxtaposition, paradox, and conflict. So another thing that I tell my students is that the first premise is a promise. I promise you, dear reader, that I'm going to analyze juxtaposition, paradox, and conflict. Nothing extraneous should come into the picture, otherwise you're going to break the line of reasoning. So this is how the syllogistic construct works. So in the 4th sentence, the student gets into the textual support. So I like to see quotes and paraphrase right in the 4th sentence. So look at how this transitions here. Swift recognized this tension in the couple's early days and that the air was cold, but something about it felt like home somehow. So you can see here silky smooth quote transitions. And there's a little device that I use to get students to quote like that. I call it the 5-word rule. So if the student places a minimum of 5 words, so not exactly 5, but a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote, keeps the quote small, then it should sound conversational. And that's what we want when students embed. They also can do something kind of fancy that this student does. They quoted twice in one sentence. I really like that when students do that. It's really good, tight diction analysis, and I think it bodes well for the sophistication of the piece. So we quoted, we got to paraphrase, we got to analyze, we got to move on to more text, because we have 3 literary terms. We're going to need to have sufficient support to fully prove the arguments that are implicit in those terms. So throughout the entire song, these conflicting forces are often vying with each other. Even in the early phases of grief, she tells us that she might be okay, but she's not fine at all. So already we see that this student has addressed paradox and conflict. So now we got to get to the juxtaposition if the line of reasoning is to be fully established. So there's more, because we're shooting for 10 sentences. So this continues on to the next slide. It's still the same body paragraph. This sense of liminality is pervasive throughout the song, especially with the way time unfolds when one's heart is breaking. Recollections seem just like yesterday when the narrator backtracks to the time you almost ran the red because you were looking over at me. So again, lots of textual support. Don't overdo the quotes. You don't want big gargantuan quotes, but you need enough in here. Now we can check off the box for juxtaposition. So the promise has been kept, and now we just need a little bit more support and analysis to fully prove it. Everything seemed in place to have an everlasting love, but all that changed when he tore it all up running scared. So again, all these quote transitions are silky smooth. There does not seem to be a rhyme or reason for the sudden end, and the refrain speaks of that confusing pain. I was there, I remember it all too well. But no matter how one tries to move on, time is cruel. Swift tells us that she forgot him long enough to forget why she needed to, but everything seems so futile because the wound is so raw. All right, so we got plenty of support, plenty of analysis. In the conclusion, you got to tie it back to the first premise, fully keep the promise, and then I tell my students to echo the thesis. Wrap it all around so that you have a full argument. So it only takes like 2 to 3 sentences to do this. So let's see how this student pulled it off. Even though Swift should have seen it coming, she did not. Love is often so blinding that it blurs all sense of vision. And as she reflects, pain in the early phases of a breakup can be crippling. Time runs its own course, but for now, everything for Swift simply hurts. So you just put a little bow on it on the end. Wrap it all around. Have it go full circle. So this one took 12 sentences. It's cogent. It goes very bullet step, keeping the promise. So there's a clearly established line of reasoning for it. It does not deviate from that line. Nothing extraneous comes in. Nothing is omitted. It's a full syllogistic body paragraph. So that's just one example of how to do it. As the student moves on to the next body paragraph, they follow the template yet again. So 3 sentences for the first premise. Just switch the lit terms. You've already got those 3. There's still a lot more to do for a full analysis. So just switch up the lit terms and devices. Switch up your quotes and follow the template exactly the way we just demonstrated how to do it. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Happy teaching and happy writing is something I say to you all the time. And just as a segue, I've mentioned in the group a couple of times that Tim Freitas of Garden of English fame and I are collaborating on a textbook. And starting January 9th, I'm going to start a Teach It Right 5-week mastermind. So we're going to meet every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for 5 weeks. And I'm going to demonstrate for teachers how these templates can be used across the expository modes. We create a ton of units and lesson plans. You probably, in a 5-week mastermind, could get an entire semester's worth of work planned. We do it collaboratively. I'll look over your shoulder, but the group in the class also assist in creating those lesson plans and units. I also go over my vocabulary, my word study academy, my nuance academy. We look at the alternative grading methods, the whole kit and caboodle of some of the things that you've seen in the group. I'm discounting this because the participants in this particular session, we're going to do a 90-minute debrief session at week 10. So you're going to work with me for 5 weeks, and then you're going to go 5 weeks on your own. In week 10, we're going to debrief how these templates are playing out in your classroom. How are your students interacting with them? What are your successes, your failures, your frustrations? What's the good, the bad, the ugly of incorporating these templates into your instruction? So for 90 minutes of your time, I'm discounting this half off. And then, as you know, I also have a self-paced course for those that feel like a 5-week class is too much. I do one-on-one consulting if you just want to work with me solo. And then I do PD opportunities where I work with departments and districts. So my website is there if you want more information, teachinghowthenumber2write.com. So teachinghowtowrite.com. And you can instant message me through Facebook as well, if that's an easier way for you to contact me. So as always, for now, be happy, do a lot of writing, and take care.